Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. I do another kind of political / culture war chat with Chris today. And do our, as you term that well in one of our last ones that was like this, kind of our version of our keeping up with the Kardashians, kind of all that political drama. So we're going to talk about that kind of IDW or intellectual dark web feud / infighting between Bret Weinstein and Sam Harris, primarily about basically Bret Weinstein going on Joe Rogan's podcast with a doctor. I forget what the guy's name is, but he went on with a doctor and he's talked with Bret Weinstein has talked with that doctor and others on his podcast about what he believes to be the risks of the COVID vaccines due to some factors, such as that it's an mRNA vaccine rather than a DNA vaccine, and that they use a spike protein which hasn't been used before and apparently can have some negative consequences, or it's just not known because it hasn't been tried before. And then Sam Harris did a podcast where he had a different doctor on and basically was talking about how they were oversimplifying things and using flawed studies and spreading misinformation and causing harm because they're causing less people to choose to get the vaccines. And then also this YouTube channel called Rebel Wisdom, which originally got big for having a lot of the IDW people like Jordan Peterson and the Weinstein bros, Eric and Bret Weinstein and Sam Harris on. They've been having other doctors and health experts on a lot lately, criticizing Bret Weinstein's claims and criticizing the studies he uses and that sort of thing. So it'll be fun to get into kind of like this drama and the deeper issues of COVID and all that kind of stuff. So so I wanted to talk to you about this because I know all this stuff interests you too. So kind of I know you would talk before about how I think you were kind of favorable to Bret Weinstein's view, at least in terms of ivermectin, that it could have possibly be used at least as a very effective prophylactic for COVID. So what do you think about like all this drama and like the actual issues themselves to do with like COVID and vaccines and ivermectin?
Yeah. Well, first of all, obviously, as everybody knows, I'm not a doctor. So.
Oh, really? Because I totally am. I have like 18 PhDs.
I feel like that's like the common thing. Like you can't comment about any of this vaccine COVID because you don't have a PhD. But
yeah,
I mean,
like for the record, none of I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think either of us have looked into any of these studies that people are disagreeing about.
No, and I think what is missing from the Sam Harris and Bret Weinstein debate is, and for me is the most skeptical thing, is that ivermectin is a really cheap drug to make, right? And Big Pharma has no real, hand in the cookie jar here. If ivermectin is like really cheaply to make, easy to manufacture, easy to distribute. There's Pfizer, Moderna, there's Johnson & Johnson, there's all these companies that, are producing vaccines right now. And I mean, now they're talking about third and fourth doses and that kind of stuff. So now I'm
I saw that about the booster shots the other day.
Yeah. So how long?
What do you think about those booster shots? Sorry to interrupt you.
First of all, I think I don't know. I hate to even mention this, but I'm fully vaccinated. I had both shots, but I feel like I need to put that out there because I sound like an anti-vaxxer sometimes to people when I discuss this, because I'm very skeptical. I got it, right? But at the same time, I'm very skeptical of a third booster shot and a fourth booster shot and mandatory passports and all this kind of junk, right? And the reason I'm skeptical of that is I don't want to give government more power than they should have. But yeah, I just think that there's a lot of things at play here with money, big pharma, right? So if Ivermectin, going back to the original question or argument or statement you made, I think like the Sam Harris and Bret Weinstein debate is that Sam Harris is saying, and this has been COVID for me. You have some doctors over here that say this, and then you have some doctors over here that say this, and you have some, you know what I mean? The internet is so wide, and there's billions of people on the planet now. You can go out and find, people that will debate round earth and people that will debate flat earth for any topic. You know what I mean? It's just like this is an easy game to play. So for Sam Harris to just be like, well, I've got these doctors on and they're experts, man, everybody's an expert. And I don't fucking trust experts at all anymore. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not that I don't trust experts. Sorry. I do still have obviously some trust in experts. I did take the vaccine, so there is some still trust left with the healthcare system. But my red flags and like skepticism as at a high fucking max with all this shit.
Right. Yeah, me too. I think we talked before about how I think we have pretty similar, extremely similar mindsets about this, but maybe a little different. Like I got vaccinated twice too, but I'm also I really don't like the idea of like mandatory vaccinations. I think people should have every right to refuse to get vaccinated if they want to. But like you said, I mean, I still got vaccinated too, but I am skeptical of experts too. And I think like in terms of this whole thing between Sam Harris and Bret Weinstein about like how effective ivermectin is and how dangerous the spike protein is and those sorts of things. I'm really uncertain about these actual issues themselves. I'm kind of on the fence, I would say, because like Bret Weinstein and that doctor who was with him on Joe Rogan's podcast, they made a lot of persuasive arguments and talked about studies in persuasive ways, but then on Sam Harris's podcast, they did the same thing. They made persuasive arguments and talked about specific studies in persuasive ways. And then on that Rebel Wisdom channel that I mentioned, I've seen at least a few episodes with them talking to specific doctors and or health experts discussing the specific studies that Bret Weinstein has mentioned and pointing out like supposed flaws in the studies, flaws in the methods, that they were not replicated, and that sort of thing, and that apparently like the studies on ivermectin are not as don't make it look as favorable as Bret Weinstein makes it sound. But the interesting thing that I do kind of appreciate about the kind of like drama aspect of it is that no, I shouldn't say. I was about to say Sam Harris and Bret Weinstein both seem to be respectful to each other, but I think actually it's more fair to say that Bret Weinstein is being more fair to Sam Harris than Sam Harris is being to him, but they are being primarily respectful to each other. I would just say that, in the more recent videos that I've seen that Bret Weinstein has made in response to Sam Harris's criticisms, he's said like, I respect him and I understand why he is making these objections and stuff, but here's why I still go with my arguments. And then Sam Harris, like I said, he seems mostly respectful, but then he also is saying things like Bret Weinstein is like providing fuel for anti-vaxxers and he's spreading misinformation and false science. And it really fucking annoys me that Sam Harris always does this thing like, I know the objective truth of the science. Everyone else does not know the objective truth of the science because I have this metaphysical godlike rational powers. Rational power to be rational and know everything objectively. That shit kind of fucking annoys me.
Yeah, it does annoy me. I don't mind Sam. I mean, I've listened to a few of his podcasts and I still subscribe. What I think would bother probably both of us here is the fact that, well, at least for me, Sam Harris's views and the doctors that he had on toe more of the establishment main narrative that's kind of gone around COVID, that vaccines are pretty much our only way out of this, and yada yada yada. Where Bret Weinstein takes kind of a contrarian approach to this, not so much the norm, questions the narrative. His YouTube channel has got a bunch of strikes and a bunch of warnings and been demonetized a whole bunch of time. Where I bet you Sam Harris, well, I don't even know if Sam has a YouTube channel. I know he has a podcast, but
he has a YouTube channel. When I listen to his podcast, I usually do it on YouTube.
Gotcha. So maybe I just don't subscribe to his YouTube feed. Anyway, regardless, I mean, I highly doubt Sam is getting demonetized as much. I'm not saying he doesn't at all, but I just feel like since he toes more of the mainstream line, and Ivermectin doesn't, going back to like Big Pharma and all that kind of stuff. And you know what? Throughout this whole pandemic, I mean, it's not like we really tried that many options. A lot of them were demonized, hydroxychloroquine being another one. As soon as Trump mentioned that, it was completely, you can't even mention that. But then you had, I don't know if you heard, but on Joe Rogan's podcast, Brendan Schwab hurt his leg, went in to see his doctor, and his doctor was like, yo, what way do you lean politically? Because if you're conservative, I got some hydroxychloroquine.
I did see that episode.
So, anecdotal story, I know, coming from a Joe Rogan podcast, but still, like, I bet you there's millions or at least thousands of these examples of, and who knows, there was other ones as well. I think zinc and the mix of some other thing, and not just that, like
vitamin D, right?
Vitamin D, another one.
Yeah, I think vitamin D is supposed to help a lot. From, I don't remember whether it's for you getting it or for you having like less severe symptoms if you do get it. And then like one thing you were talking about Joe Rogan too, that he's mentioned ad nauseum on his podcast that I do appreciate, is that none of the health experts are talking in public about how, this will probably be way easier on your body if you try to be healthy, eat healthy food, exercise, don't be a fat fuck with heart problems and who's pre-diabetic, because that makes you your health more risky for literally everything.
Yeah, it was never promoted. I mean, no talk of quit smoking, no talk of like, this really hurts people with high diabetes. None of that. It was like, we got to wait for vaccines and let's go. Right. And I think like, and that's my problem with this, kind of to circle the bases and head home here with my point. I think like my issue with this is like, there's a pandemic going on. A lot is unknown about this because it came from China. Hell, we don't even know how this thing was started. Right. There's a lot of debate about that. If there is an unknown and science is to take place to kind of help us out here as a society and human race, science is about testing all options, right? It's process of elimination. You want to try ivermectin. You want to try hydroxychloroquine. You want to try fucking, tequila shots. You want to fucking try whatever you can do to kind of get this thing and, cure as many people as possible. And I just don't think that was tried. And I think it was more like, Pfizer signed up for this big contract. And, at the same time, it's weird to be like, well, these vaccines have worked. Pause, because, like now we're finding out that did they really work? Because people are still, the cases numbers are rising, especially in places that have had fully vaccinated populations. Israel, Hawaii is getting their ass kicked right now. Oregon,
I think
Texas, all these places.
I think a point that I don't even remember where I heard this, because like you, I watch and listen to so many podcasts, but on one that I was listening to yesterday, I think it was, someone made the point that even in places where the number of cases are, well, actually, this reminded me of another point too. But someone was saying yesterday that even though the number of cases are rising, the number of cases among people who have already gotten vaccinated, they're not having severe symptoms, because the main benefit, as far as I understand, of the vaccines is that they prevent severe symptoms from COVID. So they have like something like a 90 to 90% efficacy rate of preventing hospitalization and death from COVID. And then also, of course, a lot of people have made the point that the at least in the US, I don't actually know if this is the case as much in Canada, but at least in the US, apparently the states where the number of cases are rising are like states with a lot more anti-vaxxers and people like that. So like it's such a politically tribal issue in general, like this whole thing has become, right?
Yeah, see, that's not true. Like, and I know that's what this toted as the narrative right now, but if you look at the cases, like the narrative right now is Texas and Florida are getting their ass kicked with cases because they're Republican and they've got a lot of unvaccinated people. But if you look at Oregon and you look at Hawaii, and you can bring up their cases right now, they're just as high, and they're both blue states and blah blah blah, but they're never talked about, right? Because they're
okay, I didn't know that. That's good to know.
So, but my point is that cases are high. Even in Ontario here, they're getting high. They're getting high everywhere because the Delta variant spreads, and it's kind of kicked the ass of even those that are vaccinated. Now, you're right. Like, if you have both shots like we have, and we were to get the Delta variant, to us, it would just be like a minor cold, and we'd probably get over it with a day or two. But if you hadn't gotten those vaccines, it would probably kick your ass, and you'd be on the couch for 4 days, right? So, there is some benefits to getting the vaccine.
That depends on the person too, though.
Oh,
like I think you're right. The vast majority of the time, but then there like there are the rare cases where there's super healthy people who die from COVID, and then like super unhealthy people to whom it's just minor. Right.
100%. And I'm always aware there's 100 variables at play here. Age being one of them, height or ethnicity, your gene pool, all of that kind of stuff, your blood type, if you've ever had comorbidities before, if you had diabetes, any of these things obviously would factor into whether the vaccine is more effective for you or not. Right. So I just, going back to the ivermectin thing in pandemic, I think all options and all cards should be on the table, right? I think, we should be trying all the things. And a lot of doors were shut early on. A lot of people were censored early on. And I think that this became a lot of political is at play, a lot of power struggles, right? And I think there's a power dynamic going on there between Sam and Bret, who have two opposing views, and one's like, I'm right over here because I got this doctor, and this guy's like, I'm right over here because I have this doctor, right? Which I've seen that play out a million times over COVID, and we're doing it right now. Like in Canada, you guys don't have a mask mandate. We still do have a mask mandate. How is that scientific? How is that scientifically consistent at all?
It's not,
right? So this is all political nonsense, and it's all whatever. I don't know. It's just. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's like you were saying, there are always like 100 factors at play, and there's so much individual variation, and then you can look at studies, and it depends on how the studies are done, and it depends on which doctors you're listening to, and which studies you're paying attention to, which information you're paying attention to, and which doctors you're listening to depends a hell of a lot on your political persuasion too. And then there's just so much confusion. Like, I think for anyone to really have a good understanding of what's going on, you probably have to get deep into studying all of these papers and stuff. And even when you study those papers, it's hard to figure out like which of these papers are believed by the majority of scientists, and that's more likely to make it true. But then, of course, especially like anti-vaxxers or vaccine hesitant people would bring up the point that it's been the case countless times throughout history that the majority of people have been wrong about an issue, like the Earth being the center of the universe, and the world being flat, and all kinds of shit like that.
Yeah, in the early 1800s, if you thought that dinosaurs existed, you were considered a complete whack job, right? Now we have archaeologists that have unearthed all that, and we've done the science and data on it. And now if you think that dinosaurs didn't exist, now it completely switched in a matter of, less than 200 years, right? So, I mean, things happen all the time. And I think that's one of human beings' huge flaws is this I know what's going on, and I'm guilty of this too, man. I'm fucking so guilty of
Me
this.
too. Yeah.
Right? It's like I've read so many books and I know all this shit, and the majority of people that are below me are fucking idiots and they're not paying attention and yada yada yada. But I think all you can do is be open-minded to trying a bunch of things, which we haven't done with ivermectin at all. Like, what are these South American and India studies that have kind of saved them from COVID without them being vaccinated? Like, why are we ignoring that data? And these doctors are right over here. No, these doctors are right over here, right? This I don't know. Are you familiar with the Great Barrington Declaration at all?
No.
So the Great Barrington Declaration probably was formed maybe, I want to say, April or May of 2020, right after this all started. And it's headed up by like Jay Bhattacharya and a few guys from Stanford epidemiologists, and pretty much their solution to COVID from the get-go was like isolate the old and elderly and those with comorbidities, those with diabetes, and everybody else pretty much go on with life. There's not much more you can do. These guys were like, kicked off YouTube. They were, blacklisted. Lots of them were, you know what I mean? There's a whole declaration that they had online going around. And if you signed it, you were pretty much considered like a right-wing white supremacist and a Trump supporter. You know what I mean? Like all those kind of things were thrown their way. And here we are almost a year and a half, almost 2 years after COVID. And their kind of overview of this thing has been kind of what we should have been doing the whole time. I don't think lockdowns really did that much to save any of this. I do think vaccines have helped us and all that kind of stuff, but we have the data now after a year and a half of places that have locked down severely and where they were at, and people that didn't lock down at all and where they were at, and they're pretty much the exact same. So
I think there's a lot of variation with that too, though. You can find places where they lock down a lot and it seemed to reduce COVID a lot. And then you can find places where they had like no lockdowns at all, and they have just as low COVID rates, or even like the extremes on either end of the spectrum, like places that did have harsh lockdowns and the COVID rates still skyrocketed, or places that had like no lockdowns at all and the COVID rates skyrocketed. And in terms of the lockdown too, that was interesting too. Like when I was talking to Dusty about this last weekend, he was saying that in America, like, I think maybe there's probably variation depending on the state, but he said that for the most part, the like actual legally instituted mandated lockdowns, like across all or most states, only lasted 4 months or so, is what he said. So, like, I don't know, I think Dusty probably studies this more about his own country than either of us do, and other people who I've heard say like almost the extreme opposite, like Dave Smith, for example, who I know we both follow, the libertarian anarcho-capitalist podcaster guy, who's talked about how all the states have been locked down for a year and a half. So I really don't know how long the lockdowns have actually lasted and how much variation there's been between different places. And it's probably like similar to the mask mandates, like you said, between our different provinces here in Canada. You're in Ontario, I'm in Alberta, and you guys still have mask mandates and we don't.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of variations at play there. I mean, if you were to compare like New Zealand to like Russia's, kind of what they did during COVID, and compare like data there, would be two different climates, two different, ways of government, that kind of stuff. But somebody did a good one months ago that was like looking at North Dakota and South Dakota, which are pretty much in the same time zone, but two different states. One's Republican, one's Democrat, but kind of a purple state. And the numbers are the exact same, even though one lockdown longer, one lockdown shorter. I think Destiny's right though. The average is probably like 4 months. I mean, there's some states that are still locked down heavily. I think New York maybe California was implementing mask mandates again. But then, yeah, you have states that are also blue, like maybe Colorado, that have been way open for a lot longer time. Georgia was another one. Georgia's been open for a very long time. Also a purple kind of turned more blue as of recently state, right? So, yeah, that's the beauty of the United States. They kind of had a melting pot of trying different things out and blah, blah, blah. And they were a great source of data throughout this COVID thing. The problem is nobody's taken a look at any of that data from the COVID thing and returned any common sense to any of the people and said, this is what we should do. It's all political nonsense and how we can take over and vaccine passports, and cases are a big deal. Cases are a big deal. Who the fuck cares about cases, man? Like, I care about how many people are in the hospital. If that's overwhelming,
exactly. Yeah.
Then let me know. Give me a call and say, "Okay, Chris, the hospitals are fucking. Let's shut her down." Blah blah blah. Until that happens, I don't give a shit about cases, because cases could mean people that have already been vaccinated and had this thing, which a majority of people had, and to them it's like the sniffles. And I didn't care years ago when people got the cold. So why would I care about this now?
And also, like to piggyback on that point, I think it was. It might have been the last one of Thaddeus Russell's podcast I was watching, where he was talking to this I forget his name, but this libertarian fighter guy who he's talked to before. But I think they were talking about how a lot of
Buck Johnson.
Yeah, I think it's that guy. It might be. I'm not sure. I'm not totally sure, but they were talking about how some of the studies that have found that, people have gotten, I forget whether it was, I think it was studies on people who have gotten COVID. And, some people, they were saying that some people have used that as ways to spread information that a lot of people are getting COVID who haven't gotten vaccinated. But apparently some of the people in those studies had been vaccinated, but they hadn't passed the 2-week period where you're more vulnerable after getting vaccinated before it's considered that you're totally safe after you've been vaccinated. Oh, wait, no. This was a Joe Rogan podcast I was watching yesterday. One of his newest ones was Zuby. Zuby was making that point, actually, and Joe Rogan was disagreeing with that point, I think. So, yeah, like you were saying earlier, like there are so many different variables that are going on with this, and it's super hard to know what's actually happening. Someone just made a good point in the comments here. I think the vaccine should be tested on politicians first. If they survive, the vaccine is safe. If they don't, then the country is safe. I don't know who Monica Wisniewska is, though. I'm going to look up who that person is. But yeah, I think that's. Well, I mean, I understand how people would be mad about that, but I think that's kind of a good point.
Yeah, it is a good point. I think we have to rethink testing and outcomes and what we're expecting out of this virus, because I was told early on by a lot of doctors, including like those that, were on the other side of this, that vaccines were like the ticket, and that once you have your 2 doses, you're done. Now we're learning that isn't the case at all. Now we're learning that if you've had 2 doses, you can still get COVID, you can still spread it, yada yada yada. So the testing obviously was a little bit off here. We didn't see this coming, and I think vaccine hesitation is to be expected after that. I'm sympathetic to that argument because FDA didn't approve this drug, and we rushed it out. And we just, like, if you're 20 years old and you haven't had a baby yet and you're female and you're, we don't know what this would do to a reproductive body. We haven't had this vaccine out for, 20 years. And yeah, you know what I mean? Like, and
that's another interesting point that Bret Weinstein made about about how the COVID vaccines are using mRNA rather than DNA. And he was talking about how they're based on the spike protein, which hasn't been done before. And he was making the point that this use of the spike protein can make women more vulnerable. It can negatively affect their ability to get pregnant, supposedly because it concentrates mainly in their ovaries. And then on one of those episodes on Rebel Wisdom that I saw, in which they were criticizing that specific claim. The guy was saying that it does get concentrated in the woman's ovaries, but it doesn't actually affect their pregnancy rates. Like, that's where it's concentrated, but then it spreads throughout the rest of the body. So I think though that's a good point, but that's also a good criticism. But then also another factor is that we don't have any long-term studies on the effects of these, because it's not possible to have done that yet. And then another point I was thinking that I forgot to mention before is that when we're looking at numbers of, for example, like the number of COVID cases in comparison to the approximate number that would have happened otherwise if not for lockdowns or vaccine mandates or any other sort of methods of preventing things like that, that's really hard to know, because those are counterfactuals and those are hypotheticals. Like we were saying, there's so many variables, it's really difficult to know what the number of cases would have been otherwise if these sort of things hadn't happened. And there's probably, as there always is, that we've been talking about, so much variation depending on where you're talking about.
Yeah. No, I know. There's so much. There's so many unknowns here, and I think that's been one of the. Sorry, I'm just reaching for the lighter.
That's fun.
That's one of the things that's frustrating, is that with so many things unknown here and so many things not tried, there's been so many experts. And there's been so many people that think they know everything, and like Fauci, for example. There's videos out there that you can watch of this guy flip-flopping on everything, from you shouldn't wear masks to you should wear masks to the schools should be shut down and children shouldn't be going back to let's open up the schools to, like, it's just like back and forth. And this is over like the last year and a half. Yet this guy is projected as the guy that saved us and a Jesus-like figure. Yeah,
and that's another aspect that I think we talked a little bit about before, like with Fauci, like literally having lied about masks and things like that, and perhaps getting data wrong about, like, when we talked to before about the what's that testing called, where they make viruses more deadly to see how they could prevent pandemics in the future. What's that testing called?
Man, you're testing me.
I forget what that testing's called, but I think you know what I'm talking about, right?
I do, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
People were criticizing Fauci for, like, approving these sorts of studies being done at that Wuhan lab in China, and like a lot of people have made videos about Rand Paul criticizing him for this in public, in court, and that there's and he's cited other studies and other doctors that disagree with him about this point, and Rand Paul himself is a medical doctor also. So and I think people have brought up some reasonable points to, like, how dangerous this sort of testing could be, and I understand that point too. And this is another thing that I'm really uncertain about. Like, it does sound super fucking dangerous to do that, but can it be done in a safe way? And if it can be done in a safe way, does it actually have the ability to prevent future pandemics like this? And you could even ask the question, is that a reasonable possibility, even if that sort of testing did lead to the actual outbreak of COVID from the Wuhan lab in China? If that is the case, then that gives lots more people much stronger reasons to not to think that testing is a dangerous thing and shouldn't be done. But like how we don't know how this is going to work out in the long term in terms of vaccines, we don't know how this could work out in preventing future pandemics either. And then also in terms of Fauci, like with him lying about shit and stuff like that, it also gives more fuel to anti-vaxxers and people like that saying, look, he lied. That automatically means vaccines are bullshit and they don't work and COVID is a hoax or some shit. So people get carried away about that shit too.
Yeah, the test you were kind of citing there is the PCR test, which does the random
Yeah.
looking for the amount of dead viral component within a scan. And yeah, it could find, it magnifies it at like 40 times or whatever. So you could have like a minuscule of the virus and look like it's, all over the body. And I don't think PCR tests are offered anymore, but yeah, again, another chalk that up to another fuck up. Like, again, with a lot of things that I think we talked about before, I chalk a lot of this up to like just human, not ignorance, but like stupidity and just like, you know what I mean? Like, we don't have to get into this if you don't want, but here's another example. I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's going on in Afghanistan right now.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So complete fuck up, right? To be expected, because when there's lots of working parts at play and there's government involved and there's decisions and generals and you got to blah, 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 and emails sent back and forth. And you know what I mean? At the end of the day, there's nobody really in charge except for this Joe Biden guy who doesn't even know what day it is. You're left with a fucking horrible evacuation and a complete fuck up. But that makes sense. Now, you know what I mean? Like a lot of these things are complete fuck ups by the government, like 9/11. That was another one that was complete fuck up by the government that day. They weren't able to get aircrafts out and to intercept in time. Complete fuck up. COVID, complete fuck up by government. Healthcare institute, complete fuck up. Idiots
and that's fucked up. People get politically tribal about that too, because people say like Trump fucked up the pandemic and Biden is better, or they make the opposite point. Biden is terrible on the pandemic and Trump was better. They both fucked it up. Like neither of them did a good job. And I'm curious what you think about just the fact that Biden is pulling like basically everyone, or at least almost everyone, out of Afghanistan. Because I think when Dusty and I were talking about this recently, we were agreeing that it is, in spite of all the fuck ups, it is a good idea for the US to get out of Afghanistan. That should have happened a long fucking time ago. But the way it was done was a clusterfuck too. Like people have died and they haven't been able to get out safe. And a lot of people have seen the footage of like people clinging onto planes and falling off of them. And apparently one guy fell to his death. And then some people are like, America is taking in some Afghanistan refugees, and then right-wing conspiracy theorists get carried away. Like, what's that name? That guy's name? Oh yeah, Charlie Kirk, who's saying like, this was Biden's deliberate plan to bring Afghans into America, man, which I think is kind of bullshit. But then I saw Trudeau talking about how we're taking in some refugees from Afghanistan too. And I think that's a good idea, because you cause this clusterfuck. And like I said, I think it was a great idea in general. I'm not a big fan of Biden, but I think that's one of the few things that he did that's a good thing. He just did it in a fucked up way. And there were so many errors with the way in which it was organized. But I think that's good overall, and that it's like, it was like, where else are these people going to go? Like, the country's controlled by the Taliban now. And I mean, I'm not an expert on this shit either, of course, but from what I've heard, basically, it sounds like the Taliban was almost inevitably going to take over leadership of the country whenever America pulled out, regardless of when it was going to happen.
Yeah, so much for being there for like 20 years. You're there for 20 years, and within 2 weeks, the Taliban just comes in and takes over all that territory that he occupied.
Exactly. So, yeah,
I'm with you guys though, man. And kind of, I think you guys are taking the similar approach that Scott Horton has taken on this matter. That is like,
yeah, sure, yeah.
Definitely, it could have been handled and executed a lot better for the exit. The exit strategy was totally fucking botched, and I think that. Yeah, that looks bad on Biden, but you're right. I do kind of I like this move by Biden. I do. And I think that some I think Scott said that it kind of perfect where he's like, I think Trump and Biden should both pat themselves on the back because Trump started this negotiation, set a date. Biden took that date, pushed it back a little bit for political reasons, but then at the end of the day, finally did execute it. And I think both those guys have to be patted on the back because, yeah, there's no reason. It should have ended in 2008 when Obama first took office after Bush. They should have left Afghanistan then. There was no
I mean they should have, like, if they even, I don't even think they should have gone into Afghanistan or Iraq in the first place, but at the very least they should have left after they killed Saddam Hussein, and if not that, they should have at least left after they killed Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. If both of those guys are dead, those were the stated reasons in the first place. You're not going to like execute every Taliban member and all of their fucking children. Like, if that's your fucking plan, you should be honest about it and do that shit, even though that's a fucking terrible plan too. But you're not going to take out the entire Taliban. Like, even in one of Bob Woodward's books called Obama's Wars, he was talking about how one of the generals in charge of the war in the first place, General Petraeus, he basically said that we learned the hard way that the strategy of counterinsurgency for dealing with terrorists in Afghanistan does not work, because it's basically just creating more terrorists, because we're going in there and we don't understand the terrain and the way their culture and politics works. So we're getting our asses handed to us because the Taliban know how to navigate the terrain way better than we do. And then because we're killing Afghanistan people, some of whom are innocent women and children, that's giving the terrorists fuel to recruit more people to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda or ISIS too. And that's another clusterfuck of the whole war in Afghanistan and Iraq and all the other countries in the Middle East. Like since the 80s, America, they were backing the Taliban originally in the 80s, and they were backing the organization that became Al-Qaeda, and they were backing the Taliban against Al-Qaeda, and then basically Al-Qaeda like there were fractions within Al-Qaeda, and then it became ISIS. So like America keeps alternating between fighting on the side of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS, and sometimes, or even often, they're supporting both of them at once in different countries, which is so fucking stupid.
Yeah. Going back to the theme, there's multiple things at play here. Like, I think, Afghanistan. Yeah, complete fuck up. Somebody was saying that they produce like 90% of the world's opium. And that
I've heard that too. Like about American soldiers guarding poppy fields, for example. Yeah.
So put on your tinfoil hat for a minute here, and go with me in the rabbit hole. But one conspiracy theorist could say that the switch from the American people's addiction from oxys and kind of, that to fentanyl, which opium is not that much needed for, has caused the American government to kind of, there's no reason for us to be here anymore. You know what I mean? Because a lot of that opium product was shipped back to the United States just for even pharmaceuticals, not even just for the black market. It was just for, creating drugs for painkillers and that kind of stuff. So,
I didn't know that.
There's a lot of things at play. Obviously, that's probably not the main factor. I highly doubt the U.S. But interesting nonetheless that Afghanistan has the 90. It's crazy. It's like 90% of the world's opium comes from there. So, yeah, was it ever going to be a democracy? Probably not. Did we overstay our welcome? For sure. Like this, it should have been ended sometime in the Obama administration. I don't think, like, around the Bush era, I think the approval rating for them to invade was fairly high, especially after 9/11, right? I think there was kind of, this happened, and we're tribal, right? So human beings are going to latch on to revenge or, something's got to be done about this, right? So, but yeah, total failure. Leaving, total failure. And no surprise, right? Human beings at the hierarchy are just as dumb as us plebs down here at the bottom that are just, trying to keep up by reading books and figuring out what version of reality we subscribe to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well said. Yeah. It's so like both of these issues, COVID and the wars in the Middle East, they're similarly so fucking complex, and there's so much corruption and political bias involved with like all of the people who are in charge of everything that's going on, and it's so hard to figure out what's going on, and they're just clusterfucks all around. I think the wars in the Middle East are more of a clusterfuck, for sure, because like so many people have died needlessly, so many innocent people have died, and shit like that. But yeah, like I really hope. I think we might have talked about this before, but I'm not sure. How do you think that that COVID is going to turn out in the future? Because I know a lot of people have talked about how it might permanently change culture in some ways, and it seems like maybe that's happening in some ways with people who work in office jobs. Like some people have options to work at home. I forget what company it was, but I saw something about how with some companies they've done this thing where like you're required to be vaccinated to come into work. So, but I'm pretty sure the specific company, I forget which one it was, but they were saying that you're required to be vaccinated to come into work. But if you don't want to be vaccinated, you have the choice to continue working from home instead. I think that's a much better policy than just requiring everyone to be vaccinated. And it seems like I've heard at least that people in general seem to prefer working from home too. But then again, that does also incentivize this breaking of the separation between your work environment and your home environment. And in terms of COVID itself too, in addition to just the way it's affected culture and the way that it might affect culture in the future, I really hope, and it kind of seems likely, that in the future, maybe COVID will become like more similar to a common cold, where it still happens. It's not going to become completely extinct, but enough people will be vaccinated and there will be herd immunity and stuff, so that not that many people will get it. And if they do get it, for the most part, it won't be that severe, and it'll become kind of like an accepted part of the way we live in the world today.
Yeah. I know. I think you're right. I think it's here to stay. For how long? Who knows? It might be with us for forever. But yeah, we're just going to get different variants. But I mean, as far as society goes, I think you should just chuck on. Obviously, if you're 65 and diabetic and comorbidities, and I'm repeating myself now again, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, of course.
Then get vaccine. That's going to be my go-to. But I think that the mistake that we're making in society is mandatory this, mandatory that, mandatory masks, mandatory vaccine. Even though I wore my mask, no problem throughout the whole thing, even though I'm double vaxxed. I just think giving that power to the government, no matter if you're in the United States or Canada, and you don't get that shit back. You still have to take off your socks and shoes and get sexually molested before you enter a plane, right? This never changed at all in the fucking almost 20 years now since September 11th. It's not like in 2010 we all sat down as a society and said, that shoe taking off shit, that hasn't prevented fuck all. Let's get rid of that and go back to we don't have to do that. No logical human being did that. We continue on with this silly nonsense to today. So if you give up your freedoms and you say that I want mandatory this for federal employees or educators or healthcare workers or yada yada yada, you're just I think you're doing more harm than good. You're alienating some of there's people that are making mandatory vaccines, like universities, for example, where I am, there's Western Ontario, there's all the Ontario universities have made it mandatory to go to class to get a vaccine.
Oh,
So,
yeah, I heard that. I heard that about the U of A too.
yeah.
And I think I also heard that about the American military.
Yep. So they're going to see about a 20 cent. Well, I read an article. I think it was like the Star National Post or some shit like that. I forget where I read it, but they estimated. And again, I fucking hate the news, but I'm being a hypocrite and presenting you with a news story here. But I'm going to continue on because I like stories. But anyway, this story said that fucking, the Star said that they're seeing about a 20% dip in enrollment this year for universities due to the fact that either people aren't vaccinated, like if you're a young female and you don't want to get vaccinated right now, I'm totally sympathetical to that argument. You haven't had a kid yet, you don't know what this vaccination does. You could have a kid 10 years from now, and because you took the vaccine, now you're born with a kid with a third arm, right? So we just don't know. You don't have any of that long-term data, like the polio vaccine, like the herpes vaccine, like the fucking whatever else vaccines we've already established and been running for about 100 years. We have hard, good data on that. We don't for these vaccines, right? So, but yeah, universities are taking they're going to take a cut here, right? They're going to potentially lose up to $2 billion, but this is just universities. There's so many.
Oh, 2 billion
projected. Just on average.
Oh, okay.
Because they have less
from
students
people. Okay. I was going to ask you that, from less students going.
And I know educators that aren't vaccinated right now that are like, not happy that they could be forced to get vaccinated, right? So
yeah. That's like I didn't. It's hard to know what to think about this, because like you, I'm kind of. Like, I'm pretty much against mandatory vaccinations too. And I don't know, like in schools, for example, and in government jobs especially, it seems like if you're like, people could obviously say, well, you don't have to choose to go to that school or choose to go to work. Well, a lot of people are apparently going to do that, and it's going to cause companies to lose money. And I don't really honestly care if it makes less people join the military, because I'm not anti-military. One of my best friends is in the Canadian military, but I'm fairly anti-war. But I don't like the idea of specifically government organizations mandating their employees, and especially students at schools, to be mandated to be vaccinated. I mean,
especially for a virus that was like 99% of people that get it don't die of it. Now,
yeah, and like if you're talking about like college students, like a lot of them are fairly young and healthy for the most part. Like, they're not very at risk if they don't get the vaccine.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like if this was even 80%, even if it was like 20% of people that get COVID die from it, which a lot of people I think that's the actual stat, but it's not, right? Then I think
20%. I've never heard that before. I thought it was like 1%.
Sorry, I'm just making yeah, it is. I'm just making that up. If it was 20%, let's say it's 80% of people survive from this thing, which is not. It's 99.998 or something like that right now. Let's say it's 80% and 20 people die from it. Then you have a fucking good case for mandatory vaccinations for every human being on the planet Earth. But for a virus that's 99.9, and let's just say 98, right? I'll give you a percent. 98% of people that get this live no problems, and I know somebody that has been double vaxxed, had the Delta variant, and has what they call long COVID and doesn't still have their taste, of sense, and smell. So I'm well aware of this could happen if such and such, but at the end of the day, we don't make these risk assessments for like people that drive cars, or people that smoke cigarettes, or people that go skydiving, or people that want to be pilots, or people. I can go on and on for hours, right?
But well, it depends on what you're talking about, though, because like seatbelts, for example, are required in cars. But that doesn't mean that like cars are banned. So I mean, that's probably
the argument. Okay, the seatbelt argument for that is like for mandatory vaccines. It's like you're asking me to drive around with a big fucking airbag sponge on the front of my car, and for you to not wear a seatbelt. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're asking me to protect you from me coming towards you, when it's not even like, if you're vaccinated, you shouldn't give a fuck what anybody else has been vaccinated or unvaccinated. That is now
I
a
totally
problem.
agree.
Yeah,
I totally agree. I think we've talked many times about how we're kind of similar politically, and like I wouldn't call I don't like to use political labels for myself. I wouldn't call myself a libertarian or liberal or progressive or a conservative. I try to evaluate things based on the issues. And like in terms of the seatbelt, for example, I'm such a civil libertarian that when I was hanging out with a girl for a while over the summer, she never wore her seatbelt, and I always would wear my seatbelt. Like she would pick me up and drive, and we would drive places and stuff like that. And I never asked her to wear I never told her to wear your seatbelt because I feel unsafe with you wearing a seatbelt. I just figure, well, I'll wear a seatbelt. If you don't want to wear one, it's not really my problem.
yeah. Man, I don't know about you, but like as soon as a girl does something stupid like that, it's like a complete turn off for me. I don't know. Like and this happens all the time. I'll be like, I'll see a cute girl riding her bike and then she'll turn around and she'll have a mask on outside. I'm like, oh, your hotness factor just dropped by like
yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't know. And girls could probably do, I'm not being sexist, but girls probably do the same for guys. If I, was a flat earther, that would definitely lower my chances of getting laid by any female, right? So it goes to
yeah, probably. Yeah.
But yeah, man, the world, it's pretty fucked up what's going on right now. So Afghanistan, COVID, it's all a mess.
Yeah, it was so like the media reactions to Biden pulling out of Afghanistan were so predictable too. It's like, oh, this is so awful, and it was a bipartisan thing. Like, we shouldn't come out of Afghanistan. And then, like, I saw a video yesterday, which was someone commenting on a video where CNN, the supposedly lefty media organization, brought John Bolton on to talk about how it was a terrible idea for Biden to pull out of Afghanistan. And it was and he said, and Trump was bad on this too. He wanted to pull out too. So to me, that was like, wow, you're kind of making me like Trump more and Biden more.
That shit drives me insane. I fucking, who was I watching? It was either Tucker or Ben Shapiro. One of those, I watched a clip, and when in it, they were showing a clip of CNN, because the girl from CNN that's in Kabul right now, they showed a picture of her like 8 months ago. She has no black veil on. She's totally has her hair free, and she's like, hi, I'm reporting. And then now she has her, because the Taliban's taken over, and they're going with a more Sharia law approach, right? So
I saw that too.
Right?
So
but it was either Ben or whatever, one of these right-wing pundits was like, well, look, CNN is saying this, CNN, as if like CNN is the bearers of truth after the last, like, your lifetimes have been like totally ripping apart CNN as the most fucking stupid organization that ever is. Right? So
yeah,
that shit drives me insane when they do that, because it's, I don't know, you're showing your tribal alliance.
Yeah, and they were criticizing that reporter for wearing a hijab while she was there too. They're like, oh, she's just becoming a victim to the Muslim culture there, and she's just like virtue signaling and shit. And I saw in a video where someone was commenting on this, they made the point, well, she probably is wearing that because the Taliban are controlling Afghanistan now, and she doesn't want to get fucking killed for not wearing a hijab. Like, probably sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, who knows? I mean, like, I highly doubt the Taliban is going to be a good leader of that country if they have in fact taken over, the country there. It's a mess.
Yeah.
It's a mess regardless, though, man. Like, what do you do? I don't know. I'm not, again, like, I think we tried a few things. They didn't work. I think the again, you're right. I think Biden did the right thing and Trump did the right thing. See, that's another thing, going back to, I'm not like conservative or liberal. I just said the craziest thing that would blow a lot of people's minds. I agree with Biden pulling out the troops, and I agree with Trump starting to get out the troops. I can agree with both presidents, even though they're both on political parties, when they do something that they is actually more beneficial to us. Not just now, because it's been a fuck up how they left it, but this is good for the United States in 5, 10 years, 15 years, when they're no longer. And who knows? Somebody made a good point. I forget what podcast I was listening to, that this is a perfect setup for them to re-enter if they wanted to. They left a lot of military helicopters behind. They left a lot of weaponry behind, and that pretty much loaded up the Taliban. So if the Taliban goes off and starts killing people, and then they have to go, hey, military industrial complex, we need you again. We need 50,000. You know what I mean? Like, this is the perfect segue into, or going back into Afghanistan, right? So
Yeah.
who knows? I'm good with the wait and see. I agree with you and Dusty that I like that Biden pulled out. Eventually, it could have been executed a lot better, obviously. But yeah, man, there's no reason for the United States to be fucking world police anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like we were talking about earlier, one of the problems with this like neoliberal or neoconservative approach to war is that when you can't expect to spread Western liberal democracy across the world. Like, a lot of these places have totally different cultures, which are basically like incompatible with Western liberal democracy, or at least like no one really wants to have that sort of government, or it's not really feasible to organize that sort of thing. And did you see there was a clip of a few of the Taliban leaders talking about how we are for supporting women's rights? I thought that was so hilarious. Like, wow, you're like woke left virtue signaling, and you're totally full of shit. You don't support women's rights. You have like child sex slaves and stone women to death for reading, and rape women for adultery or any shit, or learning to read or going to school or any shit like that.
Yeah, I highly doubt they're the fucking Me Too movement that everybody's hoping for. I mean, it's the Taliban. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, to think that you can just go in there and inject Western ideas and democracy into a highly religious, highly, I don't know, different culturally,
Yeah, for sure.
society. I just think you're trying to live in a utopia that doesn't exist, right? We tried it, right? And we kept our eyes on poppy, and we kept our eyes on oil and all that kind of shit, and
minerals,
got a revenge. But now it's time to get the fuck out, and then make sure that, well, hopefully there's no 9/11-esque type retaliation in the next 10 years, right? So
yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because I also, the other day, I watched I was listening to a podcast, a Freakonomics podcast, which I think is really great. They talk about the economics of social issues a lot, and they were talking about how America is basically by far the most individualistic culture in the world, to the point that most other countries think that it's fucking weird how individualistic they are. They actually had an interesting one the other day that I think you would probably like too, which was about the minimum wage. And it was interesting because they were talking to a variety of different economists across the political spectrum, and basically came to the conclusion that it's really extremely debatable and up in the air in terms of whether minimum wage actually works or not, in terms of basically providing people with more money without pricing more people out of the job market, and causing less people to work because they want to fire more people as soon as they get the $15 minimum wage. And it's really like, it really depends on how you're looking at the studies, whether they're short-term or long-term, what population you're studying, and all that kind of stuff. Oh, and also to go back to that reporter who was wearing your hijab, McEldoon, who I've talked with on Twitter a lot, said this: avoiding being publicly beheaded is usually a good reason to stop standing your ground. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, shit. What was I gonna say?
We'd make you lose your train of thought.
Yeah.
I said like three different things there. I said that comment about the woman being beheaded, and then I was talking about them talking on the Freakonomics podcast about America being a really individualistic culture and how whether minimum wage works is kind of up in the air.
Yeah, I think that comes with the Constitution they have, right, and like the like free speech and Second Amendment rights and all that kind of stuff. Like Canada doesn't even come close to that, right? We have no free speech here, right?
Yeah, we have the there's this thing called the notwithstanding clause that's in our Canadian Constitution that I looked at the specific language of it once when I was reading this textbook on Canadian political science. It was I forget the exact language, but it was basically expressing the sentiment that anything you just say and do can be interpreted as treason by the government, basically. Like we don't have the it's the I forget which is it, the First Amendment or the First Amendment is free speech.
That's right. Yeah, we don't have First Amendment rights here in Canada. We have like a human rights tribunal that would go through and, like, let's say you were to deny the Holocaust or something like that. The Human Rights Tribunal would, get together and fine you. Like there was a comedian that got fined over a joke, and there's been a few examples of people being fined, gender pronouns, all that kind of shit. This is what like Jordan Peterson kind of brought to light, was this kind of thought that the government can control the speech that you use, right? So yeah, we definitely don't have free speech rights here, and with America and the United States, that has some good things and that has some bad things, right? So the ultimate like the United States was founded on these kind of individual rights and freedoms, right? Right to bear arms, like that comes with consequences though too. They're also probably, the leader in gun deaths worldwide at the same time, right? So there's pluses and minuses to both, but they're the leader of inventing products, and they're also the leader of inventing healthcare things. Like if it wasn't for the United States, we still wouldn't we probably would have a vaccine. It just might have came a little bit later, right? So
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's certainly good things about the U.S. I mean, one of the things that kind of bothers me about some of my uber lefty family members is they seem to think there's like nothing good about America and all Americans are dumb or some shit like that. Yeah. And
I love those people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like most of the people I do podcasts with live in America or other countries, and also in terms of the gun issue too. I remember Dusty and I did a podcast on Michael Moore's documentary called I think it was the Bowling for Columbine one, where I hadn't watched it in a while, so rewatching it was interesting, and it seemed like he basically came to the conclusion, which I think is correct. Is that since Canada actually has, contrary to popular belief, Canada actually has roughly the same proportional amount of guns that the U.S. does. But America has far more gun deaths than any other country. Is this gun culture, just loving of guns and the freedom to have them and everything like that. So when people are mad about something, they have this response like, I'm going to shoot you, bitch, or something like that, which people don't tend to have that sort of cultural response in other countries, at least nowhere near the same degree.
Yeah, like we have our share of guns here for sure. We're a hunting country. It's speak to anybody in rural Alberta, you probably know that a lot of people have guns, right?
Yeah, a lot of people hunt around here. Yeah,
I think the elephant in the room and the difference is, like, do you know anybody that has an AK-47 with a fucking scope? Yeah,
no.
Right? So it's the type of guns that the United States allows you to have, which again, I don't don't know. I'm not a gun person, and I don't know much of a. I don't have much of an argument there, but I would say that I kind of like. I think Canada's got the right laws in place for guns. Like you can have a gun, but like as far as like a 20 Magnum casing and fucking scope with a sniper esque, like like some of these guns are just fucking unreal, right? So
and
we don't.
I'm pretty sure also you actually have to get like some sort of background check and some sort of like mental health check to be able to own guns here in Canada as well.
Yeah, it's not an easy task. You got to provide like DNA in your mother's hair, and like there's a whole like it's like a whole. It is. You're right. It's a whole process. We don't give out gun licenses too lightly, and we don't even have gun stores you can go to. Whereas in the United States, as soon as I go over to Michigan, there's like gun stores you can go to and buy. Up to a point, you could buy ammunition in your local Target or Walmart. I don't know if you do that anymore, but still, you would never see that in Canada.
I'm not a quote unquote gun person either, but it is something that interests me. Like, I think it would be cool to learn how to shoot a gun. And, since Joe Rogan started talking about it on his podcast years ago, I've been really interested in learning how to hunt, but I don't know. I don't have anyone to teach me how to do all that shit. And it involves a hell of a lot of stuff that you need to learn how to do, obviously.
Yeah. I'd be good with the one and done on those. A lot of things in my life I like to try once and then that's it. I never do it again. So I'd like to shoot a gun once and see how it goes. And then that's it for me. I don't have a desire to own a gun or whatever, I unfortunately.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I've gotten through my whole life so far without it pretty fine too.
But I know people that own guns. I know people that are gun advocates, and I get it. Like as a guy, I can understand like the intricacies of having a scope and a quick trigger on there or the different leather around that. I get all that kind of stuff because I'm a nerd with like computers or bikes,
exactly. I can as a nerd who loves to nerd out about things, I can totally understand nerding out about that stuff
for sure. Too. So like I know people shouldn't have AK-47s, but at the same time I understand people's obsession with just like with guns, and I'm cool with that. I'm not one of these losers that's like guns, like nobody should have them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The McEldoom made another funny comment, I think, here. As an American, I'm always looking for an opportunity to pull a John Wick spree to retaliate against the slightest offense.
What's funny about that? Like I'm dual citizen, so I'm both American and Canadian, but I live in Canada. But all the time people will do exactly what you talked about 20 minutes ago. Oh, Americans are dumb and they fucking blah, 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 right? And I'm always like, if I can and it's the right situation, I always pull out my American citizen card. Just so because I don't know, sometimes it's fun to be a troll and a dick like that. And, especially after somebody says Americans are stupid, I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm an American citizen. And then people just like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
I don't know.
It's funny, just, people sometimes say things assuming that you're like on their political team. And then and then they find out, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I'm not with my teammates here.
Yeah, it's tribalism at its finest, and it's honestly it's an intellectual low-hanging fruit for me. You could do this with any country. Oh, Brazilians are idiots, and all they do is cook coffee beans down there. Just like the Jamaicans, all they do is smoke marijuana. Like you can find any stereotype for any country. That's just easy to do. That's high school shit for me. So I don't know if I'm ever in a conversation and people are like, "Oh, Americans are stupid" or whatever. It's like, so are Canadians. Whoopty shit.
Yeah, of course.
I'm stupid.
Like they're definitely. I have known some Canadians for fucking sure who are just as dumb as the dumbest Americans that I've seen, for sure.
I'm like one of them. I'm guilty of that for sure, man. I don't know. I know some shits I know about because I read about it, but some shit, if I don't know about it, it's like, I don't know that topic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So anything else that you can think of to talk about that we haven't discussed in terms of all of these issues, like, tribalism and COVID and vaccines and the wars in the Middle East and Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all chaos. At the same time, the debate I always have in my head, and I mentioned to you before, is like, is it super chaos, or are we living still in the greatest time ever to be alive? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, there are some interesting arguments about that too. Like for example, of course, the Steven Pinker's famous book Better Angels of Our Nature, and then his newest one that kind of is sort of a sequel to that and forwards the same message about how we're living in the safest time in world history. I think that that's an important point to make too, and I do agree with it. But then I also understand some of the arguments that people make against that. It's like, even though the more people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 50 years or something like that than in any other point in history, and crime rates are declining, and even though the other than World War II, after World War II, there has been much less war. Even if you include all the war in the Middle East, apparently, like for example, with the people being risen out of poverty, it's still the poverty level varies between different countries. So the poverty level, like people being lifted out of poverty in some countries, still means them living on $1 a day. So, but then people get too political about this too. So like people who criticize that will say, well, that's still not fucking good enough. Well, but I think the important point to make though is that, you should still acknowledge progress. Acknowledging progress doesn't mean that you shouldn't pursue more progress. Progress is good, but then try to continue making more progress. Maybe even it is the case that people who talk about how good of a time we're living in the world, it's not as good as they say it is, but there has been progress. I mean, another point that some people make in terms of the economic examples is that, yeah, more people have been risen out of poverty, and we have better lifestyles, but it's still the case that there's a disproportionate spreading of wealth. Like something like 100 people have like the same amount of wealth as like the bottom 50% of the entire world or some shit like that. And then you can look at that in America too. Like there's an enormous disproportionate amount of wealth. But then also people who also criticize that point say that, yeah, but even the lower class people, most lower class people still have like cell phones and Netflix and stuff like that, so they're living like better quality lives than poor people used to live. So I think those are all good points. It's just like, progress is good, but more progress is also better. Things are getting better. What we see as poor standards and poor people and bad situations, what we classify as that is better than the way they used to be, but they should still improve also.
Yeah, that's a great book. It's one of my like faves, Better Angels of Our Nature. And the general thesis of it is like eventually the curve that you're talking about, like, educational, poverty, wealth, distribution, capitalism. Yeah, you're right. Over the past, since World War II, all these things have gotten better. Life expectancy's got longer. Sure, it's not perfect. There is dips in the curve like Pinker talks about. But overall, if you were to expand out this graph to, 100,000 years, we'd be, if we keep going on the same path, we'd eventually go up. Like nobody's nuclear wasted themselves, and there hasn't been any like real chemical warfare that's wiped out millions of people. You know what I mean? Like we have the potential and capabilities of doing all this destruction since World War II, and nobody's really pulled the trigger, which is a miracle, right? Like all these like
for sure
dictatorships haven't pulled the trigger yet on any of their nuclear weapons, right? But nobody ever talks about that. So I think it's like, yeah, COVID sucks and fucking lockdowns suck and like the government sucks and Biden or Afghanistan was, yeah, all this shit sucks, but still this is like there's a glass half full, glass half empty. The glass is like 50% empty with like all these issues going on, but really it's like 80% full. You and me are talking 1,000 miles away right now. over a video. If I get a fucking headache right now, I can go inside and get an aspirin. I had ice cream earlier tonight, which, like, imagine putting together ice cream 200 years ago with fucking no refrigerator or all, you know what I mean? Like all these things that we never think about that are currently around us. Like I have a microwave, like if I were to fucking fly anybody from the 1700s and say, look at these skyscrapers downtown, they'd be like, holy shit, and they're really looking at like a TD Bank, like they'd be blown away by all this shit. And yet we're like living in this all the time, and people are just like, oh my God, he's not wearing a mask in this restaurant. We complain about the most asinine fucking shit I've ever heard of, right? So I don't know. I think human beings have always been complainers, and it's funny that we complain about. Yeah, like it's right to complain about this shit. Like it's stuff that we should definitely keep our eye on. Like I'm not saying like this is all fun and games, right? COVID hasn't been nice to anybody, and people have lost their businesses, their livelihoods, all that kind of shit. But yeah, be skeptical of government. Be willing to look at multiple sides of every issue before you make your conclusions. Don't make conclusions right away emotionally. Think about this long term, and over time, intuitions come first, strategic reasoning comes second, like Jonathan Haidt always kind of says. And I think that it's helped me a lot, and I know it's probably helped you a lot to kind of not be bombarded by the horrible shit of the news and the internet all the time. There's fucking sure. I'm able to listen to podcasts while I make my workout and audiobooks. It's fucking
exactly. Yeah,
they didn't even have video games until like 60 years ago, right? Like my mom grew up with like Pong, and she thought that was the shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like,
and now you can literally play virtual reality video games.
Yeah,
just barely, but you can.
Yeah, my son plays like Fortnite or whatever. Like has headsets and talks to like all of his schoolmates like virtually online, and they converse and have a community that they just go around and like play their characters and shit like that, right? So like I don't know, it's crazy, and there's a race for the moon right now with Elon Musk and a bunch of billionaires, right? So like there's crazy shit going on, and that's amazing, right? But there's also like a lot of like crazy shit that's not good for us either, like COVID and fucking dictatorships and government overreach and all that kind of shit. So yeah,
for sure. Yeah, these are all important points to make. Like you said, like it's important to be open-minded, but also skeptical, and just evaluate things based on the way you want to, and make your own decisions. And remember that people are going to sell you this totally ideological message all over the place, and there can be things that most things have good and bad aspects to them.
Yeah. And if you pay attention long enough, you can pick up on these things quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, yeah, I was going to give an example and do a long speech, but that's good enough, man. You can notice, man. If you listen to enough propaganda from either side, is what I was going to say, that you could pick up on it ever so slightly, and what guys are like, Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, unless you can think of anything else, I think we've pretty much talked about enough here for this time.
Yeah.
Sound good to you?
Yeah, we covered multiple topics. I got to go to the bathroom anyway, so it's all good.
All right, cool. So yeah, thanks for talking to me, man. Thanks to everyone for watching. Thanks to those of you who subscribe to the channel and click the like button on the video, click the bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. I'm going to do a podcast with Dusty and our nerdy fantasy friend Tristram from the UK on Sunday about the third book in the First Law grimdark fantasy series by Joe Abercrombie called Last Argument of Kings, about bad people doing bad things and killing people and magic and wizards and power struggles and all that kind of good stuff. And thanks especially to those of you who give me money on Patreon, which I greatly appreciate. And I'll put the link for that in the description, as I always do. Mindgasms on Patreon. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. And also, just examine different viewpoints in terms of COVID and that kind of stuff, and wars in the Middle East and political issues and everything. And I think probably the next time I'll talk with Chris will be when we do our next movie chat, which will be on Blade. Unless we do another political chat before then. So yeah, thanks again, everyone. And thanks again, Chris. And anything else you want to say before we end it there?
Nope, all good. Stay safe, everybody.
All right. Adios until next time, everyone.